Wonderful people of the internet, and welcome once more to our Sunday special live. And we are joined, as always, by Helen in lovely sunny Malta, Piotr in lovely sunny Portugal, Adam, which looks like he's in midnight in Solihull, myself from Northampton, and we have a guest speaker today. This is Adelle Martin, and we will be talking about a very important subject. Once we get all of Adam's nonsense out the way, we'll be discussing midlife and menopause. That's something that I think we should all be interested in, because if it doesn't affect us directly, it will be within our ecosystem, within our environment, and it will affect us one way or another. So Definitely. Learning a bit more about it is going to be super enlightening and super valuable. And I will try and keep my language to a tastier rather than a more moderate level. Don't look at me like that, Adam. It's possible. I've done it once or twice before. It can happen again.
Have you?
So without further ado,
I'm not sure you have. I'm not sure you have.
We've not witnessed that. No, we have.
I will find someone who'll sign a stat deck saying that I've had a conversation without an expletive in it. I will. It will happen. I may have to bribe them.
The fact that it needs a stat deck tells you what you need to know.
Yes, so take Adam. I read the supplement this morning, as I try and do most mornings, even with a 3-year-old hanging off my neck. I really like the lesson at the end that you got from the Resolve retreat. So looking to hear more context around that, if you can wedge it in between the economy in the Middle East and the blah 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 blah. So take it away.
I definitely will try. So you'll note I was fairly. I tried to be not diplomatic because, as you know, I'm not really scared of saying what I think, but keep the Middle East chat relevant as far as economics, macroeconomics, the UK and property goes. So the obvious piece is the oil price going up. Thought it might go up a bit more, to be honest. And we've said a few times in the past that you can often tell where a market is at by when a significant shock happens, and it probably should impact the price more, and it doesn't. That tells you the current sort of state of play as far as oil goes. Although the oil price thing is still confounding quite a few people, because the economy of the US sort of marches on, and it printed a tiny bit above the inflation consensus this month. And you'd accuse it of settling into that range that I've been talking about for the last couple of years, where, you know, you get below 5, you get below 4, and then no one really wants to go up anymore on the rates. And that's a little bit too cynical, maybe, because the government are the biggest beneficiaries of this inflation. We should also consider that when you're at 5.25%, when you're above 5 in the sort of with the tailwind we've had over the last 15 years, you do need to be very, very cautious when it comes to raising rates. And much as this would be very unconventional in central banking terms, one of the things that annoys me about the world in general, a bit like these, you know, these speed limits in Wales, and there's been the fuss about 30 goes down to 20. You know, I don't sit on the fence, but I have a view that nobody else seems to have, which is, why does no one discuss 25? Why are we not looking at the benefits of 25? Why do we have to go from 30 to 20? Why can't we have a broader conversation? Because there's a 50% difference between 20 and 30. Sorry, Piotr.
That's because 20 is plenty.
It's easier to slogan, is what Piotr's saying.
And look, I'm not taking a position. I understand the arguments on both sides, but the problem is we can end up driving at 1 mile an hour because then nobody dies. And that's the same logic that leads us not to leave the house in the morning, let alone do exciting things like skydiving or whatever else we might do. So that's the point that I raised, plus our arbitrary nature to ascribe certain arguments to things. But the whole oil thing, given that the risks probably remain outwith of the Middle East in terms of what Russia could still do and what's within its gift to be able to do, does mean that the oil price collapse, expecting the global recession, does look maybe a little bit hopeful. Hopeful is the wrong word, but hopefully you know what I mean. So obviously the impact on the UK could be a bit more inflation. Now, America's, you know, core 4.1, CPI 3.7. We're still at 6.8 until we see the print next month, and core was still above 6. So it's a very different world for us. And of course, if, as they do in times of difficulty and crisis, assets flock to the dollar strengthens, and that means our oil price goes up more. The US don't deal with that problem, but of course we do as a massive importer of oil. So all of those are inflationary, and the last thing that the UK economy needs at this time is inflationary activity. And I probably just park it there, because that, talking of tangents, as Helen did accurately say, although we know I can't believe we would go off on tangents, but yeah, rather than go tangential on that, I'll press on with just a brief word about the other macro stuff that went on this week. So pretty busy week in terms of figures being announced, and as usual, the challenge is to sort of sift through to the important ones. The RICS house price balance was from -68 to -69, which now means only about 15% of surveyors are reporting from areas that they think are going to go up in the next 12 months. Most bearish reading for over 10 years, apart from at the very beginning of the pandemic, which obviously turned out to be a bit of a false flag. But I went into also some detail of the Bank of England report that comes out every quarter around household lending, and looked at, it talks about secured and unsecured, and it sees lower demand for secured. It also sees, they always say in this survey that margins are going to stay the same. That always means they're going to go up, because none of the lenders want to tell everyone the margins are going to go up. But they also see a rise in the difference between the swap rate and the cost of people borrowing funds. So that's not good, because at the moment, that spread is only about 20 basis points, about 0.2%, right? Which is a thin line, given how volatile all those markets have been. Bond prices went up this week, which meant yields went down, but that was corrected fairly aggressively, because you've still got quite a few people who are willing to bet that these rates are going to go up before they come down. I'm holding to my view that the 5-year has seen its peak, but then its peak is sort of 5%, and we're at about 4.3. So I'm in safe waters at the moment. And I can't emphasize enough how lucky we've been with the 5-year rate, because it's sat at the bottom of the parabola, regardless of the shape of the yield curve, for a lot of the time. And I know it doesn't feel like that for those of us who've had to get mortgages. And believe me, I don't speak to many who get more mortgages than I do. But we have actually been quite lucky on that front. UK economy still looks a little bit stronger than everybody has been thinking, although most of the prints are negative. The forecast, the expectation is that we will print a negative quarter in Q3 when we get September's figures in. And that's because, apart from anything else, July was so disappointing, where we contracted by more than 0.5%, which is a huge drop in 1 month. And it's actually quite difficult to explain. But NISA, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, do some real timing and some nowcasting now, and their best guess for Q4 is 0.2% growth. So that will keep us out of a technical recession. But who wants to go down 0.2 and up 0.2 and down 0.2 and up 0.2? We all know that's not the ideal path of the economy, because apart from anything else, you don't see that distributed evenly throughout the economy anyway. So when people nearer to the bottom of the pile are struggling already because of, I know that the Trussell Trust have got a campaign out at the moment saying the cost of living crisis is not over by any stretch. And the thing is, it takes a long time to claw back from the sort of step back in living standards that people have endured in the time where, you know, some people went from energy being 10% of their household income to nearly 30%. And whilst it's come back from there, I don't know if we're going to see 10% for a short while. because I think we've seen what's fallen off in the October price cap is forecasted to be the last drop for a while, and then we'll be back on the rise, I'm afraid. And of course, the oil price will have a significant impact on that, as will the natural gas prices. So that's where the macro side of things are at. And there's not really, there's plenty more in there, but I'll leave it to people to have a look for expeditious purposes. And also I went on, so always come back full of fire when we do our property business retreat. It was that week of the year. You know, it's a wonderful thing. It's I don't know how to describe this without it being quite basic, but my brain hurts towards the end of the week because it is just in utter overdrive. There's a lot of, you know, we prepare quite well. We ask the delegates to prepare quite well. There's a lot of filling in stuff and a lot of reading at our end to be done. And a lot I think it's dead important. So to explain, we have a 4-hour individual session with each person that comes along, but the rest of the room are participating. So the hive mind is at work, you know. We obviously operate Chatham House rules, and I'm not going to breach those either live on air or off air, to be clear. But what I included this week, I thought was well worth sharing, because it's a timely reminder for everybody. So we had one delegate who is a really, really significant achiever, international property portfolio, has had an international career, frankly, absolutely honoured and a bit blown away that he would spend a week of his time, which on the clock would be more valuable than anybody there, I would have thought, if you just looked in dollar terms, working with us. So that was amazing. But where we got to actually was more, he came for the property secrets and stuff like that. And we do workshops, and we try and make them interactive, and there's a lot of knowledge shared. We do a lot of case studies, we do a lot of cool stuff like that. But that's us talking to the room. That's Rod and I talking to the room generally. And then there's the interactive sessions. But what he really got out of it was, and the thing is, I think you find this as you go on, the more experienced the people are that come, and the more well prepared they are, and the more it's always interesting to see what other people are doing already, in order to not only grow their portfolios, but, you know, to keep their life on track. And how do they manage day to day? Because we all have, you know, a different path and a different journey and all the rest of it. So what we had here was a classic where, property wise, there was some fantastic stuff going on. There was also, and I felt I could speak to this because I know that I'm guilty of this as well. There was also a bit of indulgence, or even such a thirst for knowledge that it almost became greedy, you know. So I can be on those, I can be in those YouTube rabbit holes or those podcasts or whatever. So I get it. I love learning about stuff, but of course you have to remember to implement it. And I was telling a story about the dean. I did say the words, I'm afraid to say, I'm going to say them again now, when I did my MBA. So I try not to say those too many times, but it does frame the story in time, at least. The dean of the business school was a chap called Mark Taylor, who'd been a professor. He was a professor when he was 27 at Dundee University. He taught, he'd been a professor at Oxford, and he'd also been the manager of a hedge fund for BlackRock. So to say that he's done okay would be a minor, a little bit of an understatement. And of course, he didn't come to be the dean of the business school for a pay rise, because you're not going to get that from Warwick Business School versus BlackRock. But he did come to do a job, and a job he absolutely did. He was in many ways the perfect leader, in that he was unpopular with most people because he started cutting resources and putting pressure on people who looked like they had pretty cushy lives, and started saying to the, you know, for those who know about academia, if you're a fellow, you tend to be tenured, and that's a job for life. Now, unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, some people at some point in their career might well put their feet up on the desk and not do too much research. The Dean Taylor came in and said, if you don't produce 2 4-star research papers every year, you're out. So a little bit McKinsey in the ranking and yanking. And of course, that was an electric shock to some academics, but it also helped him to bring in some of the most exciting academics in the country. And while he was there, he built the recognised as the best behavioural science department in Europe. And that was great for me, because I love the idea of behavioural science, and I benefited massively from listening to the people that he brought into the business school, and that was fabulous. But Dean Taylor once gave a speech where he referred to himself as an academic practitioner, right? So this is someone who does try and know all the answers, but also does stuff at a really base level. And I thought, well, I like the sound. That sounds really cool. I'd love to try and be an academic practitioner. And whilst I've not yet, and I'm unlikely to manage a hedge fund for BlackRock, nor was I a professor at any point, and I'm not sure I'll ever make it, it gave me a good idea for a sort of way to go about life. And it was commented this week that it's quite unusual to have someone who has quite such a thirst for academic knowledge, but also is quite active in my case, in the property space, obviously, which was great. But going back to the delegate and the story, they were a monster achiever in terms of work, in terms of business, in terms of everything else. But what we did was we broke down to, you know, there seems to be so much going on here. What does your life look like day to day? And it turned out the answer was extremely well structured, right? But there was room for between midnight and 5 a.m. for sleep, right? And that doesn't mean sleep. That means go to bed at midnight, make sure you're up by 5. So pretty impossible to be sleeping over 4.5 hours a night. And I don't care who you are, Margaret Thatcher did that when she was PM, and she was PM for 11 years. And of course, she went considerably mad in her old age. And if you don't think those two things are linked, then I'd encourage you to go and listen to someone like Matt Walker, who's on a whole number of podcasts. And I've been someone who's sacrificed sleep to do stuff, right? So I feel qualified to talk about it. And I've spent a lot of time, especially in the last 12 months, working on that. That's why I wear one of these sleep rings that I've got on. I have a whole routine around it. And so for the first time, one of our focus areas was health and family, right? But on the health side, it was be sleeping 6.5 hours per night within 12 months, which is not going to be easy, but you've got to creep forward towards it. But because he's so structured, he's actually got a very, very good chance of achieving that. And there was some family stuff shared that I won't go into, but let's suffice to say, it reminded me a bit of, if you've ever read Elon, I think it was Elon's first book, is the aided autobiography or whatever it was. He asks himself the question in that book, how much time does a woman need every week? Because I might try and squeeze one of them in. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I'm not sure that's the way to go about it, Elon, if I'm honest with you, if you would like a healthy relationship. But you hear lots of stuff about spreadsheets and scheduling and all sorts of, I imagine spontaneity must be quite thin on the ground. Let's just leave it at that. And I think you need to. It's all very well. This delegate's working in one of the most competitive environments in the world, where the big dogs from around the world are some of the great minds on the planet, and some people's drive is such that they will sacrifice things. But I think, and hopefully, this will hand the baton quite skillfully to Adelle. But hopefully, you can understand that when you're 20, or when you're 25, or when you're 30, or when you're 35, or when you're 40, or when you're 45 and beyond, then there's different things that are priorities in your life. Your life looks different. Your energy levels might look different. You need to have a careful think. And I'm a big believer that when the pandemic came, one of the things that we all couldn't choose was how old we were. And how old you were had an impact on how you dealt with the pandemic. So, for example, a lot of people who are 50 and above who were still in sort of very high achieving jobs, stopped and said, hang on a second, mortgage is paid, loads of money in the bank or wherever it is invested. What am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I doing? And that time we don't take on a day-to-day basis and a week-to-week basis, and we don't take enough of it. And this is why we do the week, although a week's a long time really for all of us. This is why we've done the week away, because it is. I remember the first time I went on one, which was now 7 years ago, and my thinking was, well, do you know what? Even if it's rubbish, I'm going to concentrate for this week on my property business. And what we've tried to do is kind of expand that to say, you need a concept of balance in your life, because there's very little point trying to be, if you want to be the best free kick taker of all time, right? Arguably, it's David Beckham. And he put the hours into doing that when he was a kid. He wasn't, by all accounts, an outrageously naturally talented footballer, but he did 3 hours a night. If you remember Johnny Wilkinson when England won the Rugby World Cup, not that I'm suggesting we're going to do that this year, by the way, to be absolutely clear, but you never know. Only a few flukes to come if we can do it. But he sat and he would be out kicking conversions before training started. And if you listen or read anything about Kobe Bryant, who sadly passed away a few years ago, he was at training at 4 o'clock in the morning. If you came to training at 4 o'clock in the morning, he went to training at 3 o'clock in the morning, because he had that mentality of, I'm just going to crush my opposition. And so again, he was just the most well-practiced basketball player of all time. Probably not the most naturally talented. Steph Curry, who's still playing at the moment for the Golden State Warriors, similar mentality. It's just, forget the 10,000 hours. These guys are in the 100,000 hours category, the super elite. But that is for one person in 10 million, 100 million. 1 billion, arguably. So it's very, very difficult to try and replicate that. What you're much better to try and do is be really quite good. And the saying goes these days, the wisdom these days is you've got 15 minutes. You do something for 15 minutes a day, you'll be better than 95% of the population at it. If you can find several complementary skill sets, and I use the example in terms of what I think makes a good property developer today, if you can take those 5 points that I raised, and you can be, in the top 5% in all of those points, which is not in any way as ambitious as trying to be Steph Curry or Lionel Messi or whoever, right? Then you can become you'll definitely be in the top 1% of property developers, and you'll be really, really skillful, because the balance that you need, and that balance goes beyond business and property into life. Absolutely. There's no point being the richest man in the graveyard. I put that quote in there today. And there's no point, flogging yourself and losing sight or losing people along the way who you care about, and doing damage to families. And I feel fairly well positioned to talk about that, because having had the privilege to go to Oxford University, and hopefully Helen can back me up on this, some of the people who not coming from money, not coming from a particularly privileged background, although I was very lucky to get a scholarship to my private education, which was massively, massively helpful. I thank my parents for pushing me to do that all the time. I saw people who'd had abject privilege, incredible, sons of politicians, and they were just people, dad or mum was in the House of Lords, and just but they weren't present. They weren't present as parents, and that impacted them as children. And then they went on to vastly underutilize all of their potential. And this is why I think it's why the old, what do they say? One generation to make it, one to enjoy it, and one to lose it. I think that becomes a real thing unless you really proactively try and at least nudge your children along the right path. I know I'm a bit judgmental, right? But some of the kids I see at my kids' school, I just think, there's the third generation right there. And the way things are going, they're going to have to take some steps to ensure that doesn't happen. Or hopefully they've got a pretty incredible trust set up. But anyway, enough. I'm going to zip my mouth, and I will try and keep it zipped, and hand over the baton for the bit of philosophy, bit of macro, bit of property, bit of everything. I'm done.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Do you know what? It has really segued nicely. The moment you mentioned behavioral science, like I saw Adelle's eyes light up, and she'll, give her introduction at the moment, but you touched on so much that she talks about here, about health, fitness. She had a 3-decade career in banking, in finance herself. But the reason we're talking about menopause today is because it's World Menopause Day on Wednesday, the 18th. And as somebody that is kind of starting out on that, and again, me unlearning, same as you, Adam, deep dive down all the rabbit holes on menopause. And literally every day I have a conversation. I ask myself and I ask my friends, why is nobody telling us about this? Why did nobody warn us? And then, when I'm passionate about something, it always leaks into other, even work conversations. And the amount of guys and developers that I'm having conversations, they're like, oh, well, why my wife suffered, and oh, my sister suffered. And this is, yes, it affects women physically, but the ripples of this are huge and touch everybody. If you've got a mother, a daughter, a sister, if you're a boss and you employ women, like you really need to know about how this affects women, about the challenges that they're going through. We talk so much about mindset and mental health, on these Sunday chats, that this was just, I couldn't not have this and put this on radar, because my mind as a woman has been blown learning about this, and we are delighted that Adelle is here. So thank you so much for joining us, Adelle. You're coaching women and men actually through this now. So you just want to tell people a bit about yourself and how you got into this?
Absolutely, Adam. Do you know what? Perfect segue. So 13 years ago, I had the privilege of working through the financial crisis. So I'll let you know. So in the August, I went to work in a corporate payments area, and they, I just got there, and they said, actually, Adelle, because I did my MBA, so I get that. So they said, right, let's move into this area. and then you can do your MBA. And my basis was leadership psychology, and actually realizing that we promoted to incompetence, and actually we put the fastest processor. I'm showing my age. I started in finance in the 80s. So basically I kept saying, right, so I have to learn to drive, I have to learn to fly an aeroplane, but I can look after 1,000 people because I'm the fastest in the room. I didn't feel right. So I looked at that as part of me every day. So that was in the August. So changed everything. I was like, yes, I'm finally going to get in that boardroom. I've got the job, everything, my daughter, everything was great. That was in the August. Guess what happened in the September? I got a call and said, Adelle, there's Run and this has happened. Oh my God. It was the best place to be within that. Honestly, it was career. I was doing my MBA. I was working absolute long hours and I was holding that in the boardroom. At the same time, I was then flying to Scotland because of where I worked. We then picked up HBOS. So I was going between City Airport and Edinburgh, and then dealing with my daughter, doing her GCSEs and ageing parents. I was pretty much in that sandwich of managing everything. But thought, yeah, great. So how did I manage that? And don't get me wrong, I've been in fitness and health and well-being all my life. But I just got into my early 40s. And so you just keep going. So what sort of slipped? Sleep, absolutely slipped. Stress you can imagine, was going through the roof. And I had propensity when sleep and stress, then I'd introduce sugar, my 3 S's. And also I was less active because I'd pretty much spent. And then so I was managing that all in the boardroom. And then just things in family life happened. We had some big news, both with my parents and with Millie. And it's like anything, there's always the straw that broke the camel's back. So I was trying to manage all that and then trying to work out how the hell am I going to do all of this. But it didn't matter. Whatever happened, Adelle, you're always resilient. You've been a girl in a man's world. Whatever you get thrown at you get back up again. And that was the absolute truth. I absolutely did. But something, and I couldn't put my finger on it, just felt different. So as I was going into boardrooms, not just this wasn't in peacetime, I was in crisis leadership. Okay, so I'm thinking, how do I go and engage? I'd read all the autobiographies of everyone in crisis leadership, but I could literally go in and rule and do a presentation, no problem. And as I started to get in, I thought, oh my God, I always feel a little bit hot when I go into these presentations. And then I got to the point where, oh my God, am I forgetting the slides? What's going on? And the worst bit was I got in and I was in Scotland. And it was February and it was cold, but I learned the art of a black dress with a pashmina and a jumper because I could get off quick layers because I was getting hotter and hotter. And they put me, and I always like to get into the meeting early because I like to sit strategically so I can see it. But because I was hot and I had to go and cool down, I was slightly late. And they sat me next to the graduate and I was getting hotter and hotter. And he said to me, Adelle, it's Scotland and it's snowing and you're really hot. And he said, do you want a drink? And in my brain, I said, no, I don't want a drink. I need a towel. I'm so hot and sweating. I don't know what to do. And I smiled. I thought, he's 24. He's got no idea. And then as the presentation went on, I just felt like the performance was slipping. And I came out and I got the feedback. You're all right, Adelle. You don't seem your normal self. You've missed a few points. And then I'm thinking, I've been a high performer. And then you start to doubt yourself. Am I not there? What's going on? And the more I got in a mess, and then there was one final meeting, I literally had to go there and back because I had to manage something very significant in the family. It was significant. So I had to fly up to Edinburgh to deliver it. And as I got into the room, they asked me my name and I just completely forgot. As a little girl, I was asked that on the stage at 5 and everyone laughed at me and I had a speech impediment. So I've had to work my whole life to manage my speech impediment. But that day in the boardroom, they said to me, how can you even present? You can't even remember your name. And that took me straight back to my childhood. I left the building. I got in a cab, lovely chatty cabbie. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I thought to myself, I'm going down. And I just don't know why. I got off, got to City, drove around the block. I just wanted my family to be in bed because if anybody asked me if I had a good day, the answer is, I don't know. I can't even put one foot in front of the other. Sleep, everything. On that flight home, I had 4 bags of family wine gums just to stay awake.
Wow.
All right. I got up the next day. Whatever happened, I always took my daughter to school on a Friday. Then I went to work because we had a local office. I dropped her off. I still to this day don't know how I got from the school to my mum's. And I walked in the door and I said, just make this stop. Just make this stop. And I just crashed to the floor, took me to hospital, and I literally had a breakdown.
Yeah.
And at the time, this was 13 years ago, it's stress and anxiety, you know. Here's some antidepressants. Have you considered a less stressful job? I said, for God's sake, I've spent my whole life creeping up that ladder, getting an MBA. At those days, I had to get an MBA to get in the boardroom. There were people in that boardroom that didn't have one, but I needed one. I got everything where I needed to be. I said, I'm not having that. So I took a 6 month sabbatical because I was broken, went and did some research. I tore up the antidepressants, and then I realised I had gone through menopause. This was 13 years ago. There was no information, and I still got told, should you give up a less stressful job? And again, I've gone into more detail on my story because it just sits with what Adam was saying. And at the time, I had no idea what I was going through. And the interesting bit, when I finally did, and I worked out that everything I was doing before my 40s just doesn't work. And even then, women were going, would it be better to say you had mental health issues rather than menopause? Because menopause means you're getting old. There's a connotation between, I said, no, I'm not. I didn't go back to finance. I did go back to work, and I went back to HR and put in diversity, inclusion and policies for women and men through mental health, because you got to be the change. And I knew I had to share that. And like sort of 13 years on, so much has changed. But I was in the doctors 8 weeks ago after my bodybuilding show. So I went on to prove you can. And my hormones have dropped again. I'm going to be sharing the bigger story on Wednesday. 13 years apart. The first thing he said to me was, you look upset about your HRT. Yeah. Do you want to have CBT and antidepressants? 13 years apart. Wow. And I said, everything's changed and nothing's changed. What's not changed? Considering you're a GP, you've had all the mandatory training, and you and I know that run companies what mandatory training is. You know, is it actually applied? I said, but do you know what has changed? I own my blood work. I'm tenacious. I will not take no for an answer. Oh, and by the way, I'm now a qualified menopause coach. I want my bloods redone and see a female doctor. So that's 13 years apart. Yeah. You know, so it just shows you that it is that element of it. But for me, it's the not knowing and listening to women. And 13 years on, after sharing my story, women still come to me and go, thank you, Adelle. I thought it was just me. Exactly what I thought. I just thought it was me. It's not.
And I have to thank the lovely Amy Rowlandson and her Focus on Why podcast, because that's where I heard your story. I also heard a similar one from Lauren Kyron. She thought she had early onset dementia. And it sounds dramatic when you say that, but I'm not joking. I'm living it. And I'm with you, Adelle. Like every podcast, go like Paul Lanford's was the last one. There will be a moment I'm just like, I'm halfway through a sentence and I've just forgotten. I mean, you know, kind of look at my career, look at what I do. If that's affecting me and I'm, you know, it can affect, honestly, it can affect anybody. And I was also thinking about this today. Like, I know some of the criticisms, not from these guys, but from other people will be, oh, well, menopause can be used as an excuse for anything. And what do you want? It's like the type of women like me and you that want this information out, that are the ones that are least likely to use these excuses. We don't even actually want to be honest, like to admit some of this sometimes because it feels like a weakness. But it is affecting us. It is affecting our performance. And sometimes you just need a little bit of, can you just give me a moment here? Why this is, I was getting quite emotional as you were speaking there, and I've not really spoke widely about this. But the reason why I started looking into this in January last year, and again, getting on top of your blood work and knowing all your levels, honestly, is a game changer. I did that in January. I wish I'd known about it and done it sooner, because I spent all last year thinking I was depressed. It was a really challenging year. And, you know, especially when you've got our background and you just keep going, you just keep going, you just keep going. You just do, you just get on with it. And January this year, I'm just like, I need help. Like I need that there's something not right here. This isn't me. And when I got my bloods done that show you your sex hormones in terms of where your cycle is, you can also look at where so I could see where my dopamine levels, and in a range of 3 to 11, where your normal dopamine levels should be, I was at 3. I'm like, no wonder I felt bloody depressed. I'm not depressed. There was no reason. There was no big changes. There was nothing I could pinpoint. But if you've got, low dopamine, of course it feels like you're pushing a boulder uphill. And you've touched on so many. We've not said the word identity, but it starts to mess with your identity. I'm like, great, I know I'm not depressed, and I know this isn't me, but now I've got the kind of like the proof, the science. We're very sciencey, evidency here. I've got that, and I can take that forward to do something with. And like you say, sorry, just one last point. Like you say, a lot of the women that I speak to go to the doctor, and the first thing they get handed is antidepressants. If your symptoms are hormone related, antidepressants are not going to work. You're tackling the wrong thing generally. So, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Adelle.
No, that's fine. Again, this is the MBA student in me, and the science, and this is the science of it. That then I realised it's just a process, although it feels a very personal process sometimes. Yeah. And if we take and I'm going to use the phrase again, bandied about a little bit more this year is male menopause, but it's not. It's called the andropause. Okay, so we have the menopause and the andropause. Okay, so we do a compare and contrast. So that's the andropause for over the age of 40. The testosterone levels will drop, but they drop in a linear way. They just drop. Okay, so that's how the andropause, and you'll end up with very similar. Women over 40 get around 40 symptoms, and men get 14. But the systemic ones are very similar for both. Now, for women, there are 3 elements. Both of them progesterone and estrogen will start to drop. But where the fun starts is progesterone will drop 75% faster than estrogen. Now, when that gap is together, it's called the happy hormone. So I was very progesterone sensitive. So when progesterone dropped, it impacts the brain. It's not a lack of confidence. That's my 101. It's a change in confidence and a change in purpose. Okay, it fluctuates. Now, that's the second bit. Now, estrogen and progesterone eventually do reconcile at the end, and it can start around 40, finishes around 51, 52. This is a 12-year process. It can be for some women. Mine was much, much faster because the level of stress and lack of sleep I was under. That's why I work with executive women, all right? And that's a whole nother, but those two will speed this process up significantly. So the progesterone, as soon as it goes, then your mindset and the mood and your dopamine and all those, the way the brain is, will be impacted. Okay, that's why I realised it, the process. Now, the other bit, estrogen, I call her the queen, if she just went off slowly and quietly, it would be okay. But she doesn't, she fluctuates. So she doesn't know if she's in or she's out. The fluctuations in that will create the hot flushes, electric shocks, like static shocks. Everywhere I touch started static. It will also do with heart palpitations. I talk to women who have gone to cardiologists with this who can't find the reason why, and it's estrogen. It's skin, hair, and nails. So the fluctuations in it. So think about it. It's like when it rains, you can see the sky dish, but when it really, really storms and you get a blackout, then that's the fluctuation. And stress can cause that. So the stress that I was under heading in the boardroom to give the presentations was causing the fluctuation and also the hot flushes. So I learned how to handle that. So those are the 3 elements that we're dealing with, which is different to the andropause because you got the way out. Now, I also say, and that's the tough bit that I help women. There's 2 parts of supporting women is through that process. It's gutty, it's horrible. And sometimes our lifestyle choices that we make or we're put into, whether it's a family crisis or a work crisis, will exacerbate the fluctuations. And I help women through that. And then at the end of it, menopause is still the gift that keeps on giving. So if you think about an iceberg, people talk about hot flushes, mood swings, sleepless night. The bit that's underneath is the brain. It's also muscles, it's osteoporosis, sarcopenia of his muscles, you've got cardiovascular, and that is the systemic menopause that gets given. Men also can suffer with those, but because the power of estrogen on the female body, it's about women will, if they don't manage that, it'd be about 30% faster than men. Okay, but that part of andropause and menopause at the end is the same, but women have to fight that a lot more. So that's why, yes, I help women today through the fluctuations, but I also get them to invest, which is my new, in their future self. Because when you look at, now at the moment, the number one killer in the West is cardiovascular, and that's why it is the focus of the International Menopause Society. But I think, although there are rumours, the one that's just nipped that to the bud is dementia for women, because the protective feeling of estrogen on the brain, but also we are the first generation, I'm the first generation to manage menopause in the boardroom. My mother and my grandmother didn't, but they didn't have the opportunities I had, but it comes with a cost. So you have to manage that. That was the bit I didn't know 13 years ago. So the whole purpose of why I walked away in January was I just didn't want another woman to go through what I'm doing, because you can't manage what you don't understand. And that's where I compare and contrast. I hope that helps with some as to why I was progesterone led, but also stress led, which meant that my brain went way before my body did.
And that was it for me actually as well, like waking up with almost like, they weren't panic attacks, but it almost felt like that in the morning, and the anxiety, and like I say, feeling kind of, depressed all of last year. That's what it's like. I just can't go on. I can't go on functioning like that. And also, like you say, other things like begin to affect it as well. Like I just resonated when you said like what worked before 40 doesn't work anymore. I could not shift weight. And before, I would cut the carbs, go and do some more cardio, drop off me, no problem. I exercised every day of January. I didn't lose an ounce. And at that point, I'm like, and then that begins to affect your perception of yourself and your own mental health, because I'm feeling big, none of my clothes fitted, and that's not a nice feeling. Like as a woman, it wasn't for me. And I'm like, but I'm trying. And nothing's working. So that's, that starts to have an impact and mess with your view of yourself. You're putting all this effort in and nothing's changing. So yeah,
it is, and you're absolutely right, because I get a lot of women come to me, and it's really interesting. Women will reach out to me because they feel like they've lost control of the body, and then as we build that strength and I explain about how to get control, then the mindset and the other things come through it as well. And I also help women, how to sort of share that with their, their family, their workplaces, etc. But you're right, when you feel it in that body, it feels like, and you're right, I used to call it the Marbella diet. You could do something for 2 weeks and get on the beach. You can't do that. And the reason why is estrogen has such an impact on digestion, and that's really just, thank God for goodness, with them, even in the 13 years we scan, so digestion, but also it's muscle loss. So the more muscle we build, then the more that we're able to control. Hence why I proved a point, and then someone dared me to step on the bodybuilding stage, and I did, and I have done 3 times an hour. I'm a pro, and that's to show that muscle is a game changer, but also, like you, is to embrace this. And I have, don't get me wrong, it's a tough process, but if you invest in yourself, I'm living proof that you can come out the other side of this. And as tough as everything has been, I wouldn't change any of it, because I'm able to help so many people. And as I say, you have to be the change you want to see.
How long does this process take? Is there like a period, or is it that you say, or is it depending on how you deal with it? And
so absolutely. So from 39 to 40, our hormones do start to decline as females and as men. But I said we've got that other element of it, and it could take between there. And the average age in the West at the moment is about 51, 52. Now the thing is, as much as we want, we might have a moment. We've got to go with the process, but you can do it the easy way and the hard way. So for me, we have to accept there are lifestyle changes that we may have to change. And if we change those and really lean into the process, I can get women through it calmly on most days. But yeah, it's how you, and this is the information I wish I'd had 13 years ago. If I knew how I could keep in the boardroom, even when I'm having a moment and I can't quite remember my name, I can teach women ways of handling that. So yeah, information is key. You can't measure or manage it. So from that point of view, that's what I do now, is help women through the process. We can't, I've tried, you've got to go with the process, but there's an easy way and a hard way of doing it.
Is there a correlation to when a woman starts menstruating, and starts the menstrual cycle, and to when she's, because I guess some girls start earlier than others, right? So does that mean that the menopause starts earlier or later? Has there been any kind of correlation or connection between the two? People don't look at that.
No, there isn't. But the really interesting point is that girls' periods are starting earlier now, and the average age of the menopause is coming down. I believe that's environmental. I really do. As a whole nother piece of work I can chat to you about. But yeah, Jay, I monitor this stuff all the time. There isn't. And there's no correlation between you and your mum either, because our lifestyle and environmental impact us significantly. It's very little genetics, but it's quite alarming how younger girls talks about estrogen in products, in water, etc. So yeah, it's an interesting piece that I'm following quite closely, but there is no link.
But it's very common. Sorry, no, it's just to say that it's very common that exactly, like, I've got friends who aren't even 40 and are going to their GPs now with symptoms, and they're being told you're too young. It's not, but it's like, can we look at the symptoms and not the box that you think we should fit in? So that's quite common. Sorry,
absolutely.
Jay.
I was just, you mentioned environmental, so just for my own knowledge, so the environmental elements, is that that maybe perhaps women are entering into more stressful environments, or that because I guess, you go back 50 years, the pathways and the environments that women were in are obviously far different from today, and like you said, lots have changed in that time, but also lots haven't changed. So are you thinking that maybe there's more of an impact that maybe is accelerating those things? Is it that kind of thing? Or is it okay? So
it absolutely is. So I work, I work with sixth form girls as well, to help prepare them for leadership and professionals. And also I run a program for younger women. Absolutely right. So in actually, my work is twofold. Us as women, we're in the boardroom now, and there's nothing we can do about it. So I help them, but I also educate the future female leaders and men as well, how to look after themselves. Because, oh God, I don't want to be criticised for this. Equality. When we've got different hormones as men and women, we have to manage that differently in the boardroom, and that was a lot of work I did previously, is help women get into the boardroom. But once you're in there, the stress, and don't get me wrong, I chose that stress at work. I didn't choose the financial crisis, and I didn't choose the things that happened at home. It was just the situation I was in. And it's helping women to manage that. So yeah, it's those environment, and also environmental as well, Jay. We look at what's going into the water, into beauty products as well. Okay, the biggest, and I do a huge amount of it. The biggest thing that drove me, and still when women come to me and go, this is how I'm feeling, I go, right, what does stress, what does lack of sleep look like? And I still believe that is the number one into chronic inflammation. And the thing is as we know through COVID, we know what our prehistoric fight, flight or freeze, what it was there for. Unfortunately, we're still carrying on that because we can't change that part of us. Women, some of the women that I work with are just constantly in fight, flight or freeze, and the systemic chronic inflammation will trigger menopause, which will happen to me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned though, like, you do have to be careful like how you say it. I had the same. I talked about this at the Modern Woman conference in London in May, but we just don't have the same level of testosterone as men do. We cannot operate the same way. And that's why, we touched on sleep. Sleep's important for everybody. It's even more important kind of at this point, and for women as well. We just can't, I am prime example. I don't think you know my story, Adelle, but I burnt myself out on the trading floor because I worked and acted like a man, totally masculine energy, and thinking I could go like that. And I couldn't. Perhaps some women can, but I couldn't. And it took a devastating toll on my adrenals and my hormones. And maybe that's contributed to kind of like the effects that I'm having now with perimenopause and menopause. But we have to recognize that stuff. It doesn't mean that we are, kind of less equal. We're just different, and we have to respect those differences. And that's what it's about. It's about kind of honoring yourself.
And there are things that should be celebrated within those differences, right? When you try to equalize things out, people just try and draw a line and say everyone has to fit within these equal boundaries, equal barriers. Everyone has to be able to do the same thing in the same way. And it just doesn't work like that. From woman to woman, it doesn't work like that. From man to man, it doesn't work like that. So, whenever you see a society or governments or whatever it is, where they just try and say, well, actually, there's this whole, range of what people can do in different levels in different places. Let's just flatten it out. Let's make everything the same. Let's make everything equal. And there are obviously things that you do want to equalize because as principles, but I don't think you can equalize person to person. I think that's a very dangerous thing because we all have attributes, skills. We all have things that elevate us above other people, and those other people have things that elevate them above us. And once you get that, you see, if you spread that across the line, you actually go, actually, they probably are equal, but one's better at this and one's better at that, and that may be another man versus a woman, or a woman versus a woman. And I think it's good to be talking about these kind of things because they're pretty much invisible, right? But probably more so from where I'm sitting, right? It's probably invisible because I won't be looking to be going through that, right? There's no message coming from men that are older than me saying, oh, expect X, Y, and Z, right? But this is like, there are so many things like this that are systemic where people don't talk about it. Maybe even your mothers or your aunts or whoever hadn't been talking about it because they were just dealing with it. They were going through it. And sometimes just dealing with this stuff and going through this stuff is so heavy that you don't think to pass the message down, right? It's not something that comes into it. I mean, I started thinking more and more about this kind of stuff because I'm fairly inquisitive. We were on Amy Rowlandson's podcast cohort, and there was a guy on there, probably one of the funniest people that we spend time with, and he's an aging homosexual. I don't know if that's probably not the best way to put it, but he's a really funny guy. He's thinking about putting a podcast out to basically be an information point for younger homosexuals to kind of show them what happens as you age and all the changes that happen. He said, look, we don't know because you got the lost generation above them, the victims of AIDS and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So for them, they're figuring out this as they go along. There is no message. There's no, so. And when you think about it like that, it kind of applies to a lot of different things, and that's not to detract one thing from another. But coming out and kind of giving that information and in a really engaging way is super helpful because, I've got a wife, I've got a daughter, I've got friends, a lot of them are female. I mean, Helen and 500,000 other people or whatever, it's so it's important to kind of just like be cognizant that these things are going on. There may be absolutely nothing I can do in a given situation, apart from just like give that person space to kind of handle whatever it is they're dealing with in the moment.
Exactly.
But you don't know whether to do that if you think, oh, that's not a behavior of X. That's, this is a complete change in how you expect that person to be behaving based on past experiences. Yeah. So maybe there's a value point in there, but this has been super enlightening. This has been really cool. Thanks, Adelle.
Yeah, like for me, and a lot of people talk about it, but the anger, the rage, you're just angry. It's not been bad this year, but last year was terrible. Angry at everyone all the time for everything. So was super snappy. And that's not really me. My mother would disagree, but it's not generally me. But if if a woman is of a certain age and you're getting that, do you know what? Cut her some slack. You're having a bad day. Everybody knows what it's like to have a bad day. So, we be a bit more human about this. And actually, that's why I wanted to talk about this in forum. Yes, I know it's not property, but literally, like, when you as a woman don't have the information and you're confused and frustrated with your own behavior because that's not you, that's not who you know anymore, then I've seen this, like, people start thinking it's their husband's fault. They're unhappy with the husband, or they're unhappy with their job, or they're unhappy with their life, or they're unhappy with where they live. They start looking for outside reasons. Our brain likes to make sense of things and they try to pin it on something. So let's move house, let's change jobs, let's get rid of the husband. Actually, if you knew what it was and you tackled the root cause, then maybe there wouldn't be as many divorces. Maybe you wouldn't need to, eat 4 packs of wine gums or drink a bottle of wine every night or do stuff that actually isn't going to help you long term. And that's really why I want to get this awareness. This is not just about women and, let's all be nice to women and let's be understanding. It's like, we make life-changing, or we can make life-changing decisions at this time of life, or they're made for us, like Adelle said, that don't need to be so. And if we're more conscious around those decisions, then we can all make better decisions, better choices.
I agree, Helen. And it's you can't, manage. And at the time, I was really crying one minute and then wanting to stab everybody the next. It was that fluctuations. Yep. But when I actually sat my family down and took them through the graph and the spreadsheet of what my body was doing, literally, this was just a human biology lesson. This wasn't. They were like, "Oh my God, is that really going on with your hormones?" Yeah. I said, "Yeah." They went, my daughter went, "No wonder you have a mad moment, Mum." And obviously, I used to then go to the gym. And then that way, if I was having a mad moment and she used to bring my trainers in and put them on my desk, "Mum, I think you need to go to the gym." "Do I?" "Yes." "No, I don't." "No, I do. And so again, I just educated and then I've done that at work. But this is just human biology, from that point of view. That's all it was. I can't manage what I don't understand.
Yeah. The thing I've learned about that's really blown my mind away about all this is kind of to do with the brain fog. And I'm focusing a lot more like on detox. I've started going to hyperbaric chambers. It's quite good. You learn these whole new things and you start doing all these new things that you've never thought about before. But I started doing that because what I learned was what contributes to the brain fog and the lapses in memory is that your body starts to leach. And I don't know why, I'm sure you can explain this, Adelle, but your body starts to leach all the toxins like heavy metals or whatever that it's stored in your bones and all over, starts to leach back into your system. It's like, yeah, do you know what? If anybody was dealing with that, they wouldn't be feeling great and they might have a fuzzy moment. So again, just knowing that exactly that simple biology makes me, it's like, oh, that it makes me less judgmental about myself. I'm not losing it. I'm not as sharp. There's a genuine reason for why things are happening.
Brilliant. Today has been super enlightening, and that's definitely, I think everyone can take a lot of things from this chat. And how can people reach you, Adelle?
So again, just find me on executivemidlife.coach on my website and on LinkedIn as well.
Super.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you being here, sharing your information and giving everybody out there hope. And that I hope, it's helped guys as much as women as well. I really do, just to kind of be aware of it and look into this a bit more. So thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Helen, for bringing Adelle. And everyone, thanks for contributing to the chat. And see you guys next week.
See you next week.
Have an amazing